John mentioned earlier, Brandon Southall, who was supposed to be here today as well, was unable to make it at the last minute. Sends his apologies. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to add Brandon's talk into mine as well, so I try to keep them a little bit separate, but combine it as well in the interest of time. I see I have 8 minutes, so I'll speak fast. I try to focus a little bit less on any results, primarily because a lot of what we've done recently is still, the data is still very new, but also to try and bring forth the technologies, think about the ways that we're looking at using it, and then seeing if there are other ways that we can come up with as a group to use it as well. So I'll be talking about satellite tag technology that we've used in the Southern California Bight. It's a project with a lot of collaborators, a lot of different people have worked on it, have played a small role in it, and funding from a large group of agencies, including the Navy and NOAA and a bunch of other people. Quickly, previous types of telemetry that are still in use for cetaceans have, for smaller odontocetes, dolphins, etc., have relied on capturing the animals and then placing a dorsal fin tag on their animal, usually by pinning it through the dorsal. It's not really feasible to catch larger animals for a number of reasons. There's costs and risks associated with captures. There's also been these large whale tags, which are deep implant tags. They attach by going into the fascial layer between the blubber and the muscle. Based on the size, again, they're not really suitable for medium to smaller odontocetes. So as part of looking at the interactions between transient killer whales and stellar sea lions, in 2005, Russ Andrews was trying to come up with a way that was minimally invasive, would attach to the dorsal fin of an animal, collect the data for the time period that it was necessary. So he's looking for short to medium term, and then come back out the same way that it went in. So basically trying to have as minimal impact on the animal as possible. And that's led to the genesis of what is now being called the low impact minimally percutaneous external electronics transmitter tag, or limpet. And I like to joke with Russ about, I call it duh limpet, and add dorsally attached at the beginning. As I mentioned, it's originally designed for use on medium-sized odontocetes. And we've expanded, I'll show some slides here on using it on larger odontocetes and baleen whales as well. It's remotely deployable. We currently use a modified tranquilizer rifle to deploy it. So there's no need to capture. There are still obviously a lot of risks anytime you're shooting something at an animal, whether it's a biopsy dart or an impact tag. There's two different types that are currently in use. The first is a location only. It's based on Wildlife Computer Spot 5 tag. Weighs about 45 grams, 6 centimeters by 3 centimeters, and gives you about 33,000 transmissions. And again, this tag is designed to remain external to the body of the whale. The second type, which is still kind of in a prototype version right now, is a dive depth tag. And I'll talk a little bit more about the data that it gives us in a few minutes. But in addition to location, it gives us depth. It's not that much bigger, it's not that much heavier, but the downfall is that it's a much shorter battery life. We use medical grade titanium darts of different lengths depending on the species that we're targeting. They'll either embed 6.5 or 4.5 centimeters into the dorsal fin. This is a map of 7 fin whales that were tagged in the Southern California Bight, and really just wanted to start thinking about kind of what the data can provide. You know, I think it can provide movement patterns. You can look at migration routes, see whether or not stock structure, boundaries, whether the movements of the tagged animals are consistent with what photo ID might be showing or what genetics might be showing. We can look at habitat use, what's their preferred habitat in terms of the depth that they use, the slope that they use. Overlaying the data with oceanographic conditions, whether it's sea surface temperature or chlorophyll or currents, all sorts of different things that I think we can overlay to look at the larger picture. On a much smaller scale, more localized impacts. These are data points from fins and blues, 3 blue whales, and 6 fin whales over a 3-week period of time. And we can begin, I think, using this data to look at percentage of time the animal is spending in areas of high risk. So right here you see they're right off Long Beach Harbor, which, as we saw yesterday, and I'm sure they're talking about next door right now, is the busiest shipping port in the United States. So there's an application for this technology here. One of those same animals that was just plotted up there, we can also look at a much larger scale of where it's going. This animal went down just north of Revillagigedos and ended up in the Navy training range up in the Gulf of Alaska, which I believe is the furthest north record at this stage of a blue whale post-whale. So, in addition to the movement patterns, the new tag, the limpet tag, what techniques and data does that give us? This is data that was satellite telemetered back from a Cuvier's beak whale that we tagged off the Southern California anti-submarine warfare range in June. And the tag sends back dive data in a couple of different formats. One is in a behavior log, which basically gives you the start of the dive with good accuracy, the maximum depth of that dive, and the end time of that dive. So compared to the data that used to be telemetered by Argos was frequently just histogram depth, so how deep did the animal dive, and how many times did it do that in a day. You had no way of relating that back to an actual dive itself. You could look at a histogram of time of dives. This actually allows us to put a dive sequence together. This was developed by Russ Andrews and Wildlife Computers in a grant from ONR. And what you see here are a couple of dives in just around 2,800 meters by the Ziphius. The second data stream that we get from this tag is a time series data, so much like a time depth recorder tag, but on a much coarser scale. We get a depth every 2.5 minutes. And while it's much coarser, it does allow us to look a little bit more at the behavior of the animal as it's diving. Is it a flat dive? Is it a long dive? It can allow us to look at ascent and descent rates. So a variety of different things that I think we can get out of this data. Kind of putting the movements and the depth together allows for a whole other suite of analysis. Suction cup tags, these are 3 of the 7 Cuvier's beak whales that we've tagged off of San Clemente Island so far. And you can get a sense of habitat use, how they're using the different basins. One of the ultimate goals of this project will be to look at movements in relation to known naval training exercises. So can we see the animals moving from one basin to the other when there's activity? Are they still on the range where there's mid-frequency active sonar going on? With the advent of the depth data, we can begin to look at not only how the foraging ecology of the animal as a whole. For example, most suction cup tags that are put out are short term. They're 1-2 days maximum. With the 5 dive depth tags that we have out now, including 3 that are still going, we have 80 continuous days of not only dive data but movement data from Cuvier's beak whales. It allows us to look very deeply at foraging ecology, physiology, how they're using the habitat. Are they diving all the way down to the bottom? Are they diving into mid-water? So a lot of potential here, I think. A bunch of analyses. Going quickly into Brandon's talk, which is he's going to talk about the SoCal 10 behavioral response study that was conducted this summer, part of a 5-year project, planned project. Again, another large collaboration with a lot of people involved. So the overall description and objective was provide a scientific basis for estimating risk and minimizing effect for the U.S. Navy and regulatory agencies. Exactly how are these animals on an individual level responding to new frequency active sonar. Used an interdisciplinary approach and collaboration with a lot of people to try and increase our understanding on a huge front of things. And I should point out that I will be showing some slides talking about sound and sound sources, but I'm absolutely not the right person to talk to about sound. So I would direct those questions elsewhere, John or others much more knowledgeable. The approach was to use existing methodologies that have been developed in other behavioral response studies and modify them with some approaches that had worked well in Southern California previously. Included a scouting leg and then 2 legs where the actual sound source was on board. Focal species were large baleen whales, including blue and fin whales. Beaked whales are always a focal species, but much more challenging. And then various dolphins. The operational areas were intended to span as much of the Navy operating range as was really logistically possible for us to reach in a small boat. We used a number of different approaches: visual observers, photo identification, passive acoustics, again trying to bring as many different pieces of the puzzle together to look at the overall picture. Well, it's thinking about it. The next slides are just a couple of the results of the work. And back to the sound source really quickly. I can't really speak much to this other than it was designed to be lighter. And next year will be lighter even than this year. And I think John could probably speak much more eloquently on this. The accomplishments: 62 tags, 44 individuals. It says 9 marine mammal species, but Southwest actually did the genetics on this sei whale, and it came back as a fin whale. So I think right now we're calling it a probable hybrid, but I think further analysis will hopefully answer that question. It certainly looks like so. Controlled exposure experiments. There are 28 complete controlled exposure experiments, 3 mock exposures for a total of 31 sequences. So an incredibly successful field season. Primarily focused around blue whales, but we did manage to get a full playback on a Cuvier's beaked whale on the Southern California range. So in summary, everything's preliminary, but there are observable responses to sonar. But it's a complex response and may be circumstantial and context specific. And we hope that these results will allow the Navy and NOAA to better look at management and mitigation issues and assess the impacts to individuals and hopefully eventually populations.